Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are on this pretty nutty fast forward planet. Still wrapped in a pandemic after all these years. Well, not quite years yet, but almost 2 years. For the virus, actually, November. Yeah, it was emerging in China in November of 2000, 2 years ago. So we're 2 years in, and not nearly enough people on this planet are vaccinated. I think now it's actually up to about half have had at least one shot, which is amazing out of 7 billion people. But it's and we're on an overheating planet, as has been manifested pretty well and described by scientists incredibly well. And as all you know, I've been writing about this for 33 years, so I've seen this whole journey. It's halfway through COP26. I was writing about climate change before there was a treaty, back in COP0 mode. And over in Glasgow, Scotland, there's a lot going on. There's some Amazonian and other indigenous peoples were on the streets in the rain, among 100,000 or so people, just Saturday and Friday. I think one of the big changes since, let's say, 5 or 10 years ago, is that the indigenous voices, the voices of truly marginalized people around the world, excluded communities, urban settlements, are really much more present now than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. We can just talk about that with Jim Balog, photographer who's been on this beat, the same beat I've been on, a little longer than I have been, I think 40 years of his journey. He's going to be on here today. We're going to talk about his new book, The Human Element, which is an opus. I'll show it in a bigger screen in a second. It's an extraordinary compilation of his work, and it's a breathtaking scope, and you can immersive aspect of a book this large is really special too. So it's great, Jim, to have you here from Boulder. And unmute you. And David Ross, my good old friend and bandmate, who is in here in the Hudson Valley. David, you had muted yourself, so I can't unmute you.
I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, you're both here. So great to see you both and to connect with you. Jim, particularly, the last time I think I saw you was in Mexico City, maybe at the tail end of a meeting on can we understand disasters enough to get out of the way before they happen. So it's good to see you again, and congratulations on the book.
Well, thank you. Good to see you too. Yeah, it's amazing how the years go fluttering by. It's just, like a falcon flying through the air, and the falcons are gone and the years are gone.
It's pretty insane. Yeah, and time, especially this past year or two, time has lost any meaning, it seems.
Yeah.
It goes too fast, and at the same time, it seems to be dragging for many people. I'm going to show some images from your book in a minute, but let's just talk about it a little bit first. Again, I'm going to show it to people. The Human Element, a time capsule from the Anthropocene, or Anthropocene if you're British. And again, it's an extraordinary. Your career has been extraordinary, as we'll dig in a minute. But because you've had this sequence of passions that you've dug in on the biological element, ecosystems and the species that are not human. You've dug in on the elements, the earth, air, fire, water, and technology now is like a force on the planet. You've been photographing that as well as a sort of the amplifier of our imprint. And here you are still, after all these years, pushing forward. So we can get into that. Maybe you could describe for folks a little bit how you became who you are so far. What drove you first to be a photographer, second to take on these tough questions?
Well, I've been, let's say, in love with nature, enjoyed nature at least, but in love with nature really since I was a little kid. Spent a lot of time outdoors. Then later in my late teens, started to climb mountains after, I'd been camping when I was a kid and hiking a little bit and climbing trees and all the things that little boys like to do, collecting snakes and turtles and so on. But then as I got into my late teens, I learned about climbing mountains and became fascinated with being up high on those windswept ridges and all of that. And that led me to studying earth science at the tail end of my undergraduate studies, and then all the way through graduate school. I got a master's degree in the science of geomorphology, the science of how the surface of the earth is sculpted and formed. Mm. But I realized I didn't want to be a professional scientist. I was very clear on that fairly quickly. And as soon as I was in that last year of finishing the degree, I decided that I wanted to be a photographer as a way of expressing my connection with the natural environment, as opposed to writing white papers, professional papers. And I set a course towards being an outdoor environmental photographer. Inevitably, the first kinds of pictures I was interested in doing and aspired to, they were beautiful, celebratory pictures about, how grand nature was in the Ansel Adams, Elliot Porter kind of a tradition. Yet for some reason that I don't still quite have in my conscious thought, by the time I was only a few years into that, I started to realize that there was this conflict between the human race and the rest of nature, and that nobody was photographing it. This is back in the late 70s. And I wasn't aware of what some of the new topographics guys were doing, Bob Adams and others. But and then I became aware of it, but they were still on a certain kind of a tangent that I thought was missing things that were monumental and important. So in the early 80s, I just started doing these various bodies of study that were looking at how humans and nature were colliding. I was doing conventional magazine assignments at the same time, working for Life and Time and Smithsonian magazines. That's how I made a living. But whenever I didn't have an assignment, I'd go chasing off after different things. And the main body of work was about people hunting for animals for recreation. I also did a big, long series on nuclear missile silos all across the American West, because I was interested in the paradox between these pastoral agrarian landscapes and these weapons of mass destruction that were hiding underneath those prairies.
Yeah, that's some of the first work of yours that I remember, James. I remember seeing those pictures, and I think I was at Berkeley then. Pretty important, and it's important that people understand how somebody who was in love with the beauty of nature made that turn to recognizing that there was a critical role to play as an artist, that your job wasn't just to amplify and celebrate beauty, which is a nice thing to do, nothing wrong with it, but that there was a more urgent job that you had. And it's one of the issues that a lot of artists have had to deal with in the last 20, 30 years, to recognize that their job has changed from celebrating and comforting to making images and doing things that are incredibly discomforting, that are gut-wrenching even. And there's not a lot of thanks for that. People generally want their art to make them happy and to just satisfy their need for aesthetic pleasure. And when an artist turns to being seriously political with real facts and real powerful images, talking about real, the real degradation of Earth and the people who live on it, that becomes problematic. And I'm sure you've seen that. I'm sure you've been through that world.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, you put it very, very well, David. These endangered species portraits, that I did between, roughly 1987 and 1995. And you see a Dama gazelle here, a desert gazelle from the sands of the Middle East. These were situations where I just felt compelled to reflect the story of what was happening, even though it's not literally showing the butchering of these animals, or I'm not grappling with a visual that's a direct destruction of the landscape. They're symbolically isolated. These animals are separated from normal landscape into a world that was not of their own making, and it's not of their own making due to human intervention. Yeah. By the way, on that Dama gazelle picture, I just the other evening was on a podcast with a woman who's a specialist in the archaeology from old pictures from the U-2 spy planes of the archaeology of the Middle East, and they can see the traces of the old traps that the Bronze Age people would set for these animals.
Wow.
And so it's not just our modern age, recreational hunting in the case of these Dama gazelles that's killed this species off. It goes back a long, long, long way. They had miles and miles and miles of these traps set across the deserts. Wow. And the Dama gazelle and these other animals were driven into them, and the destruction of the species started, 6,000-7,000 years ago. And now we're down to the point where there's essentially none left on the natural landscape.
That's astounding. Yeah. Here's another example of one of your images from the book of the this kind of isolation of the animal. And what was interesting is you were in vivo, and you're in their element, but you were then doing these kinds of framings, I guess, to take the animal out of its element, even when it's in the region.
So I wonder, James, if you listened to Attenborough's remarks at the COP26.
I caught a piece of them. I met him at the COP in Paris, I think it was, in 2015, and I'm familiar in general with a lot of his thinking, but the comments I saw from this one were much more blunt and caustic than he has been in the past, and I'm glad to hear that instead of him just talking about the grandeur of nature. It's time to be blunt and caustic, if not angry.
Yeah, and I think the anger that people like, who say, like Greta, who says, there's no more time for public relations, but politicians, just doing good PR for themselves and their countries. That there needs to be more real action, and that's the hard thing, is how you really turn talk or art into real action, and to generate real action is the key at this point, right? I mean, the time for talk, it's not that the time for talk is over, because there are a lot of people who still don't get it, and they need to be educated. But how you make things actually happen, that's still the issue, right? When you have so much diversity of opinion and ideological conflict around the world.
Well, that's certainly the nut of the whole thing. It's we know everything we need to know. We've put out all the philosophies. We've put out all the good technological plans, and yet the action has been insufficient, in my opinion. It's incredibly frustrating to me. I mean, to the point of being really emotionally painful. I grapple with this literally every day, not to fall into a despair and a depression over this, because of knowing how dire the situation is. I'm deeply aware of what the science information is showing and the trends that we're living with. I'm deeply aware of that. And I'm really upset with how limited has been the response. All these grand plans are good. It's great. I'm glad it's happening. I'm glad the promises are happening. But hell, the promises happened 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and not enough has changed.
Yeah. And, when I think about the way the painters of the 19th century, the Hudson River painters, so-called, the great landscape painters, were used to glorify the landscape of the American West, and how people still think about that as glorification of nature, when in fact they were working for the railroad barons, who really just wanted to convince Congress that there was no one living out there, that it was actual wilderness, that they could just go and start cutting down trees and putting the trains through and mining the hills. And it's odd when imagery can be used for propaganda on either side, right? There are industries that are still absolutely convinced that everything's okay. That, as long as they are doing their best, they are serving the needs of humanity today and providing the power that we need today, et cetera, et cetera. And, obviously a large percentage of the electorate in this country and around the world still believe that side of the propaganda. So, how much more needs to be done by artists and by educators and by right-thinking politicians to really make things change.
Mm-hmm.
Will COP27 be any different than COP26 or COP30? Will there even be a COP30? It's like,
I guarantee that there'll be a COP26.
Yeah, because it's an industry, right?
Yeah, it is. It really is. Sadly, and this gets to that PR aspect of these things. Jim and I were talking earlier about going to COPs or not, and a big chunk of them are like a bazaar for clean energy companies and universities, including Columbia, are there, trying to make the case for their programs, and politicians go there to pledge, protesters go there to stake their cases, and we all go back. Although, David, I want to ask you, like Guernica, or is art always in the end chronicling more than changing? Are there examples where art really did?
Well, I mean, people
in a different direction.
People, especially right-wing critics, always say that, hey, Guernica didn't stop the destruction of World War II. Duh.
Okay.
Yeah, of course it didn't. But it.
I'm bringing in, by the way, Carter Brooks from Berkeley here, also, who's Carter is a philosopher, an artist, a musician, all kinds of things.
Picasso was warning the world about the danger of the next level of mechanized warfare, right? With the bombing in Spain, and what that did at that moment. And of course it did begin to change minds, but art can't stop wars. I think of my dear friend, the Australian photojournalist and painter and documentary filmmaker, George Gittos, who spent the last 40 years in war zones, and who believes in the power of art, and believes that, it can redeem humanity. But he was in Rwanda during the genocide. He's back, he's been in Pakistan and Afghanistan for the last 15 years. Right now, he's, if you believe it or not, in the south side of Chicago, finishing up a documentary on gun violence, and here in the United States, because it's just terrifying. And he has not given up the feeling that art can finally change minds and build a base in humanity, that the base that's necessary to make the kind of political changes. He says if artists don't do that job, if artists don't take the job as witness, and
right,
and truth tellers, and those who are not afraid to speak truth to power, then who is? And so, I'm really glad that there are people like James out there who are still doing that and putting gut-wrenching, not very pleasant images that you wouldn't want on the wall in your living room in front of people's eyes, because that's what needs to be done. We don't need to be, what did Matisse say, that his art was the armchair for the weary businessman? That's a nice thing. I mean, we would love to sink into a Matisse any day, but this is not the time for that. We need art that gets people and angry and activated and off their asses.
Yeah. Carter, how are you doing out there?
I'm doing well, David. You're speaking right into my talking points on art and climate, which is, or at least I look at it in a little bit more esoteric. I'm looking at the long-term thinking kind of strategies, and I'm trying to use art as the engagement of the problem, not just to raise awareness, not just to motivate people.
Yeah.
Right? They and then for me, what I think we also need in society and in this moment is a lot of imagination and a lot of curiosity and a lot of, and things like learning to be comfortable with being overwhelmed and learning to be more comfortable with the unknown, because these are the types of things, the qualities we're gonna need to grapple with the crisis as it goes forward. So, melting ice is a way of engaging curiosity directly. Actually, it's it's not just nice to look at and reminding us of the thing, but it's also intended to actually engage that curiosity, which clearly does with kids for sure, and other adults as well. But
let me show. This was I met Carter. Maybe it was the first time face to face. I think it was at Berkeley, giving a talk, and he brought some ice in a box and set it out like a timekeeper. It was the drip, drip, drip of the ice was like the sand in a what do you call? Oh my God!
An hourglass.
In an hourglass, and that was like it blew my mind. And then here in the back room, I shot this video. I'm going to show it without the sound. There's Carter explaining. Let me just go back to the. So Carter, you could talk through this.
So I mean, I started using ice, just as a prop in presentations, and then I realized it was just a great thing on its own. So at all different scales, I'll bring it to events. I did actually when Chasing Ice opened at a Mountain Film on tour here in Mill Valley. I did a big 300-pound block for that. In fact, I have a picture of it.
And for those who don't know, Chasing Ice was a film that focused on Jim Balog's work, chronicling with time-lapse imagery.
Yeah. So when I'll show you this in a second. It's turned into, I used to freeze things in ice, like flowers or bottles or light bulbs and things, and then there'd be a lot of detritus at the end. I found that just melting it on metal and the interaction with metal just becomes the thing that's fascinating and actually very easy to do too. So
that's a cool piece. I like that.
Yeah.
And Jim, it was really unnerving. He was basically in the back of the room while I was giving a lecture. He set one of these things up. It wasn't like it wasn't planned. It just was there, and I was seeing the drip as I was giving a talk. It kind of added a sense of urgency to the whole.
It definitely was a ask for forgiveness, not permission thing.
Yeah, it was good.
Here's the. I don't know if you can see this picture very well. This is
Andy makes you a big.
Yeah, let me hold on. I'm gonna switch. Let me switch the views here.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the first time I got to do a 300. This is the first time I tried to do a big 300-pound block. So this actually took 2 days to melt, 2.5 really. And we had this out in the in front of in the sort of foyer lobby area of the blanking on the name.
Pacific Film Archive, or
no, it was at the a Mountain Film from Telluride. There's a tour, and they were doing it at the Throckmorton Theater out in Mill Valley. And so the guy that was organizing that, I called him up and said, "Hey, I can do this ice thing." And he called me back. He's like, "How big can you go?" Because and so we did.
So you designed the holders for the ice? As
in that case, I had to figure out how am I going to be safe with 300-pound block. I hadn't tried it yet, and so I actually had a friend who is a circus performer and had a mobile tightrope set up apparatus. So I kind of squeezed it together a little bit. So basically big A-frame metal iron thing, and then I used chains you saw to secure it. So it was a little S&M-y.
Yeah, I can see that.
Chains like this. But it was fascinating. By the end, there's still ice, but it's all just caught in the chain, lifted off the ground, Nowadays I have, for bigger pieces, they rebuilt my high school down the street, and I went and was taking a lot of pictures of the construction because the school had given me my favorite lens, my 24 years ago, so I ended up getting in with all the construction workers, and so I ended up with the butts of I-beams and a bunch of big steel columns and stuff. So those work pretty well for bigger pieces.
That's great. And of course, the question I want to know is, in a normal room temperature like 68 degrees, how heavy a block do you need for an hour?
Well, so I mean, this block right here that I just pulled out, you can see it's still white because it gets all frosty once you pull it right out of the freezer. So this I just split this morning. It was a 25-pound block, so it was twice this size. I just used a carpenter's nail and split it. And this in this room right now, this will last all day. This won't finish melting by the end of the day, pretty much. The most important thing in terms of the aesthetics of it is to keep it out of the UV light, right? Because then it'll stay clear. I use manufactured Carver's ice, so it's clear ice.
Here's that other ice. I'm just showing the
beautiful.
It's pretty remarkable. So, Jim, some of your photographs and your work deals with this same idea of conveying ice depletion over time. What's your reaction and thinking about this in the context of all that photography you did?
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see what Carter's been doing. We actually did some pieces like that in Iceland, both pieces of ice that were floating in this lagoon on their way out to the ocean. They had calved off a glacier. Then we brought them inside a cabin and tried to do a time lapse for a day of relatively small pieces melting, watching them melt. And it was unbelievable. In 12 hours, we still were not down to nothing. And I expected we would be. So I'm glad to see Carter chasing this. No, I like this sort of, in close and personal look at it. I back to an earlier point, I think it's crucial that artists provide a different way of thinking about the world and looking at the world.
Exactly.
Because otherwise, the entire culture, the entire societies simply just keep repeating the same tread-worn patterns that they had. And if somebody doesn't provide new vision, then you keep being not just boring, but making the same mistakes. Andy, would you go back to that picture of mine with the smokestacks?
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me get that back up. Where are we here?
This image, we have a nickname for it in the studio, which is the Norman Rockwell.
Yeah. Right. It has that feel, right?
Yeah. And that's meant to be an ironic, sarcastic nickname. 75 years ago, that an image like that would have been propagated as isn't this grand? There's this harmonious, peaceful, pastoral relationship between industry and agriculture. But really, to me, in a lot of ways, this picture is the encapsulation of what the Anthropocene has been about. Agriculture has profoundly modified the landscape of the earth the past 10,000 years. And as we all know, the burning of stuff, particularly fossil fuels, this happens to be a coal-fired power plant in Western Pennsylvania, that has profoundly altered the air, of course, and that's what's changed the climate. So this is a beautiful picture, but it's also meant to be a painful, poignant picture. And that's been kind of the path that I've been on for a very long time, trying to look at the difficult subjects and yet find a way to look at them that pulls you in and lets you stay there for a while and not just turn the page because it's too painful to watch.
Yeah, there's a question that just came up on in the comments here. I'm just going to throw it up here because it's a really good one. Hold on. Positive. And then maybe we'll have a little music and negative. Propaganda. Here we go. Joshua Herrig. Whoops. He says, should propaganda techniques be used for good? The oil company PR folks and right wing have used these techniques to great effect, as we have seen. I'll just make the point that I had a really interesting conversation on this webcast maybe 3 or 4 months ago with Renee Hobbs, who's essentially a professor of propaganda at URI, University of Rhode Island. And she says the word, actually the origins of the word are from the church. It's propagating the faith. And it was all about pro. It can be good and it can be bad. It all depends on your definition of good and bad, of course. So it is a method. Most everything environmental groups do to try to convince us to change is a form of propaganda. It's selective information with a outcome in mind. So that it's a really interesting point. And actually 10 or 12 years ago, oh, what was his name? Morton. There's a guy who used to work at World Wildlife Fund in England, wrote a long piece on how the left doesn't understand this at all.
Mm-hmm.
That he said the marketing geniuses, who are selling cars aren't selling the car; they sell the gestalt. They're selling the lifestyle. And
this what you're saying now reminds me of all the chatter in the last week about how the Democrats have it all wrong, and how the Republicans are winning. And the problem is that the progressive thinking is nuanced.
Yeah.
And is not like it doesn't lend itself to being factless sound bites that are just fear-based. And so you have a progressive community that's actually debating rigorously and even in its not in its own best interest, complex points from reasonably held points of view, all based in facts. And the right doesn't care about that. They just say, black people are here to take your jobs away. The environmental degradation is just fake news. And that's it. Like there's no debate about that. There's no debate within the right and the like. And so, if you're trapped in a world in which you are in the world of nuance and open-ended intellectual discussion and discourse, you're at a disadvantage to the troglodyte world of lying and fear-based lying, and that won't change. I don't see that changing. That maybe is the big problem, is that the left can't just start playing the same game as the right.
Well, what I like about the image here, this image I'm showing again, is you could have a discussion about it. You could have a small footprint of this on this planet that leaves a lot of space for nature, right? Intensified agriculture, if you care for the inputs and outputs, and concentrated production of energy for smaller populations living in walkable towns, leaves tons of room for nature. And that, at least if you can engage people in ways that isn't trying to hammer them, sometimes that can create an opening, perhaps.
I think the same thing is true in the climate conversation, David. I think that even among activists and people working on it, there's the oversimplified view of how we're going to fix climate change, but the reality is so much more nuanced, right?
Yeah.
And even the COPs, like I've never gone to a COP because I look at it and I go, the governments of the world haven't created the right tools to work together on this sort of scale yet.
Yeah.
So I don't have expectations that things are going to, it's not good news. We need governments, to act at that systemic level, but it's not a surprise that it doesn't work right now because, the scale of it requires that nuanced kind of conversation and thinking. I guess the other example would be how we avoided forever any talk of adaptation for fear that it would sap the air out of, mitigation, messaging. And lo and behold, we're not ready.
Well, Andy, let me sing a song by John Prine that
that's
very
perfect.
That I wish you were playing mandolin along with. But
I have my mandolin here, but of course we can't do that. Yeah, let's go for it.
Unfortunately, we can't do that. But this is his great anthem, "Paradise." When I was a child, my family would travel down to western Kentucky, where my parents were born. There's a backwards old town that's often remembered, so many times that my memories are worn. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Well, I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Well, sometimes we travel right down the Green River to an abandoned old prison down by Adriel, where the air smelled like snakes and we'd shoot with our pistols, but empty pop bottles was all that we'd kill. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Well, I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. Then the coal company came with the world's largest shovel, and they tortured the timber and they stripped all the land. Well, they dug for their coal till the land was forsaken, then wrote it all down as the progress of man. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Well, I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away. When I die, let my ashes float down the Green River. Let my soul roll on up to the Rochester Dam. I'll be halfway to heaven with paradise waiting, just 5 miles away from wherever I am. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Well, I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train has hauled it away.
Very nice.
Fantastic.
That song still gets me every time I hear it or play it. You know, it's Prine at his nuanced best, right? You know, this is a song that really talks about longing, and also hits it right smack in the middle on Peabody's coal train. You know, I remember when I was in Mongolia about 8 years ago, helping the people, some artists there, get their first Venice Biennale exhibition together, and I said, well, they couldn't find any funding for it. And I said, well, aren't there any companies here that need some greenwashing? You know, they get to sponsor you in Venice. And they said, well, the only American company that's here is Peabody Coal Company. So, like,
right.
Jesus, they're in Mongolia.
Sure.
Those are the people that are actually strip mining coal in Mongolia still today. It's just astounding.
Well, I have a coal story for you. My grandfather on my father's side worked in a coal mine in western Pennsylvania, actually only about 10 miles away from that Norman Rockwell picture. Wow. And my great-grandfather on my mother's side was a coal miner as well, back in the anthracite country in Pennsylvania. And my wife is trimming palm fronds over here in our garden. I hope you can't hear that.
Right.
So I come from a line of coal miners, and my father's father was killed in a coal mine collapse in 1946, before I was born. And I have found it just incredibly poignant and ironic that here I am today, 2 generations later, speaking about that world from a very, very different perspective. Critical, yes. Activist, somewhat. Sometimes propagandistic, I guess. But mostly my concern is to be speaking to the truth of the moment. I'm trying to make a record and a story of what's happening, which is why the subtitle of this book, The Human Element, is a time capsule from the Anthropocene. I'm trying to put my artistic arms around this and hold it, and pass that story to us right now, but also pass it down on the river of time to the people of the future.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we're all doing in the arts. We're trying to encapsulate this, make sense out of it.
It was Goya who first said that the artist's primary job is to witness, is to be a witness to his time. And you think of those incredible Goya paintings, the Execution of Maximilian and the Capriccios, and you realize what an impact he had on a generation of European and American artists, who recognize that, that regardless of what else you do with your art and with your skill and with your ability to tell stories in images and in other ways, that I still do believe that the primary responsibility of an artist in our time is to be a witness and to bear witness and to make the evidence of that witness available to history. There's an element of faith there. That is to say that there will be people in the future to read these books. But I have that much faith left.
Me too.
That's the core part of how I try to approach this work too. It's all about bearing witness, and a lot of it, But the origin story I talk about often is how when my daughter was 2, which back in like 2001 or 2002, that's when the reports started coming out that the ice cap would melt in 70 years. And I'm like, oh, my daughter's going to witness the ice cap melting. How do you prepare for that?
Yeah.
And it has always felt to me like, everybody is running around trying to solve. It's like the metaphor I use. It's like, everyone's running around trying to solve mom's cancer, but no one's going and sitting by the bedside for the last 2 weeks. And I sort of feel that way about our glaciers and our big ice on the planet. I mean, it's like we're running around trying to solve it, stop it from melting, but actually there's something to be learned from just bearing witness from it. And I don't even know what it is yet.
Yeah, and I think it's worth having that being part of the experience. One thing I've grasped over these recent years is whether it's the arts or journalism, there's 20 different ways to go at any one of these questions.
Yeah,
a melting sculpture like Harder's, a photographer spending months on the side of a glacier like Jim, people chronicling these things like David Wallace Wells in his books, Betsy Colbert in her New York articles. It's like. And the other arts too. Stacey Levy, a Pennsylvania artist whose work I love, she does remedial art. She did this piece. They're called Spiral Wetlands. It's kind of a play on Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty.
Yeah.
But she builds these floating constructions of wetlands in lakes that are eutrophying, and her sculpture is actually taking nutrients out of the lake in a beneficial way. So. But that's just, and then there's work that provokes, so it's like everything. Because of what Jim said a minute ago about his Pennsylvania heritage related to a death in a coal mine, I have to play Blackbird, the song I wrote.
Yes, please do. I love that
song.
I'm
going to play the video version because it has I pulled together some pretty great imagery from it. Jim, this is a bandmate of mine, Jerry Krennick, who's had a great-grandfather who died in a coal mining accident. This song I wrote tells the story. It elaborates a little bit, but see what you think. Let's see here. Just have to.
With Bruce Molsky on fiddle, what a treat!
You're not kidding. Volume. There we go. Can you hear it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Blackbird sits on our windowsill in a cage of twigs and twine. My sweet Marie says she'll never set it free. I'll tell you the reason why. I'll tell you the reason. One morning as we before the dawn. A fluttering sound we heard, circling round our kitchen lamp. There came that dreadful bird. There came that dreadful bird. My sweet Marie grabbed hold of me, said, don't go to the mine. When a blackbird flies before the dawn, by dusk someone will die. By dusk someone will die. Well, I said, my dear, please have no fear. I'll be home by supper time. But a cold car crushed the life from me.
Whoops.
In the darkness of that mine, in the darkness of that mine. Oh, winged death, why'd you come for me? For it was my time. You took me from my family, left nothing but tears behind. Left nothing but tears behind. My sweet Marie, she caged that bird, so no one else will hear the flutter of black wings at dawn. No one should know that fear. No one should know that fear. Oh, winged death, why'd you come for me? For it was my time. You took me from my family, left nothing but tears behind. Nothing but tears behind. Oh, winged death, why'd you come for me? For it was my time. Took me from my family, left nothing but tears. Left nothing but tears behind.
That's so great. Great. I love that video version too. And your voice sounds great in that. And Chris, hearing Bruce Molsky play off of you, that's fantastic. What a great song too.
Thank
A
you.
great one.
Boy, that is really impressive. It brings tears to my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it still does to mine.
Yeah.
So it's I think some of this stuff can help. And all these issues, whether it's mine safety, the big questions, if you start with the human element, as Jim's book is about, in terms of how we relate to other people, and here it is again, you can have a conversation about mining, about the future. Where unfortunately our political landscape is so toxic now that some of those conversations can't even begin, certainly in the context of legislation. I mean, Manchin has been so villainized, and he's dealing with all kinds of pressures on the back end. Anyone who thinks that his positions are simply a function of his family investments, I think, is really ridiculous, is fantasizing. They're much more profound questions than that go into his position. And he's dealing with West Virginia politics as a rare surviving Democrat. So I don't know. I think starting with some experience or history, and then building a conversation is the way to go forward.
I would argue, to punch down on our own activist friends a little bit, the oversimplification of it's all about money that people like to throw out, or just follow the money and it's all about greed. I don't think that serves us, because I think there's way more to it than that, and even the oil companies, it's like it took lots of time for those institutions to grow and become the things they are, and there's just someone in the driver's seat right now. So we get a little angry at the bus driver for driving we accuse them of making the bus, is my metaphor for it. And I think it's too bad, because I think if we could still fight the fight, stop the bus, but might be more successful if we had a different attitude about it in some way. But that comes back to the nuance, which you need to have people interested in intrinsic values enough to want to do that, to let go of their own anger enough to really engage, and that sort of thing. It's not easy.
Yeah. I'm 100% on board with that, and I agree with you completely, Carter, that especially on the activist side, people are way too quick to point fingers and pretend that they're righteous and they're woke and everything is, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't even use the word woke in this but that the anti-carbon is pure and righteous, and everybody else is wrong. Well, hell, we're all using carbon right now. The fact that we're looking at each other on electronic screens is a function of carbon, whether we like it or not. The food that we eat, the water that we're drinking, pumped through carbon-driven engines. It's all through everything we're doing. And if you just pretend that you can step outside that, it's just wrong. And the message of my book, and I write about this quite a bit in the introduction, is that we're essentially all in this together. The human element is part of the other elements, the earth, air, fire, water, plant life, animal life. We're not separate from that, but the recognition has to be that as we, when we damage those other elements of the natural system, we damage the human element within the natural system. We are part of nature, and it's inescapable.
It's. I think that's a great point that you make, James, because the idea that somehow man is not part of nature, like the mind-body split, the human and nature split is equally absurd, not to see the whole and not to recognize the continuous and complex interaction of humankind and human activity as an element that we think we can control because we have consciousness. The coal doesn't have consciousness, so the coal can't control itself. But we can maybe control that, and so there's all this kind of hyperbolic rhetoric that comes from industry and comes from activists who want to curtail industry, and the truth lies somewhere in between, right? The truth lies in a kind of in some kind of an understanding about how we can continue to live productively and comfortably, and yet make the changes that are necessary in time to avoid what we now recognize as as the outcome of decades, if not centuries, if not eons of human activity on the planet.
I also think there's a scale at which we tend to ignore, which is the scale in between individual humans and all of nature, right? We're in a civilization that is its own meta-organism. That's how I kind of look at it, right? So I don't see a bunch of individuals running around using too much energy. I see an industrial meta-organism metabolizing the stored energy of the planet. So it's like being in the Borg, if you will. But most of our strategies are about trying to get individuals to act differently within that other organism, and we don't even see the organism we're in. It's sort of like, your stomach bacteria saying we've got to change this being into a plant, but they don't even know they're in a being. And I mean, it's a theory of mine that if we had that kind of imagination or could look at it like that, we would also have some other I don't know what other solutions we would come up with, but something different than we're thinking of right now.
I love that image of civilization as a meta-organism. I think actually in a way that film Koyaanisqatsi back 30, 40 years ago
Totally.
is really dealing with that.
Totally.
That film really got me too. That took me places. Actually, Jim, it had your time lapse element. I think that might have been the first film I'd ever seen where there was a time lapse where the point of view is moving at the same time. It really captured my attention at that time.
Yeah.
Right when I was just getting going as a journalist.
I saw that in my taking Bill Cronin's environmental history class in school. It was.
Oh, you studied with Cronin. I'm jealous.
It was the best, man. He was the best. You go in. This was the early days of, he did all slide lectures, right? And he would hand out a sheet with all the terms and stuff. So you didn't need to take notes because the lights were going to be down anyway. And so you just sat back and have him wax poetic about it. And he was amazing.
Was that?
I'm here today from it, right? I mean, it's we read Arctic Dreams, and there's a passage in Arctic Dreams that's about the sea ice and how it is part of the ecosystem, and the plankton feed this and yada yada yada, and he brings it all the way around to, and it gives me a place to stand on the ocean and wonder. I was like, that's.
Were you at Wisconsin, or was he?
No, this is at Yale. I was at Yale. He was.
Yale,
He
okay.
was. This is before he moved back to get this shared as. But yeah, he was teaching environmental history. I mean, he was a philosophy PhD teaching environmental history, and he was just brilliant. I mean, he was the kind of thing. He was the kind of professor. He'd come in sometimes. It's like, I was up till 3 a.m, making this lecture, so it falls apart halfway in the middle. I'm sorry. You could never figure out where.
Well, when I was at the University of Colorado doing my master's in geomorphology, I hadn't realized that side by side in the department were also some leading lights of cultural geography and anthropology. Gilbert White, most notably, who really set a new standard and story for understanding floods, natural hazards, human connections with these things. But the point of me mentioning this is that I had blinders on, and a lot of us have blinders on. I had blinders on. All I wanted to hear about was rocks, landslides, avalanches. I didn't want to hear about all this human stuff, And now in my advancing years, long since graduate school was over with, then I know, oh my God, I've got all these blank spots about human connections. And that's what Cronin, for those of you who don't know that name, it's Cronon, William Cronin. Look up his books. He was so good at, expanding on what the human connection is with the landscape. And I wish that I had been more open-minded.
I'll take it a step further. I mean, and again, sort of like I realized this, oh my gosh, I'm coming back to this Cronin thing years later, because a lot of it also was about how humans thought about nature, and then for how they acted towards it because of the thoughts they had about it, right? The big sublime thing, so they would do it, and so the whole course was really, about how we think about things and how that affects how we go at it. So, to be looking at climate and looking at how conceptual metaphor limits our actions or our understanding of climate, which is sort of what I studied when I did my master's work.
So is there one book that Cronin wrote that encapsulates those lectures?
No, I don't think so. His at the time he was studying the book that he had just got out was Changes in the Land, which is all about how Native Americans use fire on the East Coast. So his more scholarly works were more focused on a particular research area. So I don't think he ever produced anything that was. He did write a big book about Chicago, and that may have some of that. But I always looked for the definitive Cronin book, and I didn't find it either. I thought I was missing something. But within both of those books that you mentioned, there's a lot to stimulate the brain. In that Chicago book, it's really about Chicago back to your other point, as Chicago as a meta-organism, this thing that had its tentacles out all over the place, and how the trees and the water and the people and the agriculture and everything drained through this
this community called Chicago. I thought it was a brilliant insight, and it's still worth reading.
In the class, we definitely focused on Chicago at a certain point, and it's worth noting that he grew up around Chicago, and when he left Yale to go, I guess, to Minnesota, it was to take a special chair, that was related to his family or to his work, etc. So
I'm showing a
book is the Chicago book.
I'm showing a tweet. I noticed actually Bill is on Twitter, which is pretty cool. But here's Christopher Slaby showing an interesting piece related to his visual distillation of the important essay "The Trouble with Wilderness" by Bill Cronin. So folks who want to can follow him on Twitter.
And if he's talking about 19th century landscape painters, that's what I was saying earlier, that they were hired. They were hired literally by the railroads to glorify the idea of the wilderness being unpopulated and available for commercial and scientific exploration and exploitation. So
this looks like an amazing exhibit, actually.
Yeah. Where's this exhibit? What is this?
It's environmental history and eco-criticism. Let me just pull back here. Just a quick remark: the Bierstadt Haggerty painting pairing.
Well, see, so Bierstadt is a classic. He made all those amazing paintings, in Yosemite and the like, and and the work was literally paid for by the railroads.
So I guess Haggerty is an artist who did this deconstructed.
I see that.
That's actually really cool. I might have to do another an episode on this. I'll find out who this artist is. That's amazing.
Yeah, speaking of Cronin, some other books that are worth floating out to the audience. There's one book called Green Imperialism and another one called Ecological Imperialism. Alfred Crosby was the author of one of those. I can't remember which one. I think it was Ecological Imperialism. And these are really, really good seminal books in this on the thinking about these Anthropocene issues. But those are relatively recent, within the past couple decades. The book that really was the groundbreaking thing, and nobody picked it up for a long time, was by George Perkins Marsh, back in 1860 something. Man and Nature, something like that. And that was one of the earliest times that a serious thinker had, waved the flag and said, "Oh my God, folks, look at what's happening."
Yeah. So there's one last facet I want to bring up here, and maybe we'll do a little bit more music before we close out. Let me just show this image, which explains what I'm thinking about. Oh, shoot. No. What? Do that. Never mind.
You can put my book up there all you want. That's good.
It was... oh, that's really strange. I'll get it in a minute. Basically, I want to talk about the fact that there's no single we. There's no single. Not only is there no single audience, but on this earth right now, we have people with unbelievably divergent energy situations. And I was going to show slides that show two women I met in India who have
I was thinking about
different.
Your experience there and what you saw.
Completely
with those
different.
Fires, right? Yeah.
Vantage points on energy. Here we go. I'll just do it this way. Stop screen, share screen. Sorry. It gets back to something we were talking about a little earlier, including with Jim, about oversimplification. That right now there's this big push. There was an announcement at the talks to ban all fossil fuel new extraction or finance. And that's fine for us sitting here in the North, where we've pretty much got all the systems we need. It's not fine if you're like these two women. I'll open it in a minute to be clear. The one on the left was demonstrating what's called a clean cook stove, where, it's designed to burn biomass. Like hundreds of millions of people each day still are cooking on biomass, meaning sticks or dung. And this is a new one. That's a high-tech clean cook stove, and it's being operated in such a way that's terrible. It's filling the house with deadly smoke. And the woman right down the block has LPG, propane, like the fuel if you have a backyard grill. And who are we to say, no, you should not have the right in India to, or in sub-Saharan Africa, in the slums around Nairobi, where they're using charcoal. They're cooking on charcoal, which is deforesting, which is financing terrorism. The networks that do charcoal and killing people through smoke. And so you're saying that a startup in Nairobi, there is one, it's called LPG Pago, should not be able to sell LPG. I think there's a big ethical issue there. And I'm really excited to see someone just pop into our green room, former congressman and band leader and songwriter extraordinaire, John Hall.
Hey, John.
Hey.
From Orleans.
Good morning,
How are you, man?
Good to see you, man.
Good to
We
see
have a
all
bit
you
of a,
here.
this is a rare thing. We have a bit of a manel here. There's an all male thing going on here. So that doesn't happen on here a lot. So it's okay if it happens once in a while.
Yeah.
So John, are you in Nashville? Where are you?
I'm in Nashville. Yeah. Just got back last night from Florida. We did a couple shows, Orleans concerts in Florida.
Fantastic. How's that all
Stewart
going?
and Jacksonville. So,
It must be fun to play in front of audiences again.
It is fun to play. We've been doing that since June. Weekend shows, flying out mostly and flying back. And the audiences are happy to be there.
Do you mind if I ask you? Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. They don't have any virus in Florida. That's
Yeah.
Right. There's a political virus.
well, that's another thing.
They have a governor.
I'm sorry, I missed.
The governor
most
is
of the
a
show,
virus.
but-
Yeah, the governor of Florida is a human virus.
Okay, this is a Sunday show. We'll avoid too much, but we won't, because I want to ask John, having spent time in Congress, we've had this very bizarre Democrat versus Democrat standoff that's finally starting to crumble. The infrastructure bill just got passed. It looks like if he didn't sign it this morning, Biden's prepared to sign that bill, and now the Build Back Better bill is poised to be perhaps move forward. Can you offer any wisdom about how this has played out so far? Or do you feel hopeful? Is this a good sign, even though it's been a hard fight? Or what's your take on what you're seeing in Washington?
Well, I feel hopeful that that things will change from the radical tribalism has taken hold. We recorded a song by Jules Shear, who's a longtime Hudson Valley resident, a while ago, called "If We Never Meet Again." But one of the verses says, "You can't blindly fight your enemies. You can't blindly follow your friends." And it's kind of, I was interested to see that the Republicans who've crossed the aisle and voted for the infrastructure bill, which in the Senate was actually a bipartisan bill anyway. But those House Republicans are getting, lambasted by some of their fellow Republican members of the House for doing anything to give Joe Biden or the Democrats a victory or an accomplishment. It's really a victory for everybody, I think. But, and there were, right. And there were also Democrats who voted against it who, felt like it was too much of a compromise. But, that in itself is progress. That the walls between the tribes broke down a little bit. So, it was starting to get like that when I was there in 2007. I was sworn in 2007, and January 2009, after Barack Obama was elected and sworn in, he gave his first address to, it wasn't actually a State of the Union yet, but it was an address to the joint Senate and House, and the House chambers with the Supreme Court there and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the, all of the pageantry of a State of the Union address. And that was when Congressman Joe Wilson from your Carolinas, during a very quiet spot between sentences of Barack's, yelled out, "You lie."
Right.
And then I found out that he raised $500,000 that night online in donations to his.
Oh my God.
From people out there who are that dead set against compromise and getting along or against civility, I guess I could say. But I think things have gone downhill since then. Anyway,
Yeah,
we're supposed to
wow.
be talking about climate today, right?
Well, we are. COP26 is underway. It's at the halfway point, and Jim Balog, who's at the upper part of your screen there, is a photographer
Yeah.
who he was the one profiled in that film Chasing Ice about the retreat of the glaciers in
Good
Greenland
work.
and elsewhere. And Carter Brooks is a philosopher and a musician and an ice artist as well. And David Ross, who I think you have met before. He's
we met at Jonathan Rose's a long time ago.
That's right.
Former
Good seeing you.
Whitney Museum director and a musician, and John Hall. So, John, do you? We've talked a bit about COP26. There'll be a COP46 and a COP66. It's a long journey ahead, as I've been writing for a long time. And I don't know if you have a quick thought on where you see or where we're at, but I also was hoping you could play a song too. So
I'd love to play a song for you.
Yeah.
Well, just got to hope that more people all the time, I think, are realizing that this is not something in the distant future, something that's happening now, and that it's happening to them. And all it takes is for more people to be directly affected by extreme weather events, which are happening, as we all know. Tennessee, west of Nashville, a town called Waverly this summer, there was a terrible flash flood. They got a record amount of rain in a couple hours, and houses were swept away, and I think 20 some people died just in that town. And these are things that they happen just like forest fires happen, and floods in general, or hurricanes, blizzards have always happened. But the prediction all along has been that they'll get more frequent and more severe, that the extremes will get more extreme. So, when there's a super blizzard or a cold snap, it doesn't mean that there's no global warming anymore. It just means that extreme got more so. And
right.
Talking this morning about the T.C. Boyle book, A Friend of the Earth, which he wrote back, I think, around 1990, and a father-daughter story, but it's set and then was the future of 2025, I think, and 1990. At time, chapters jump back and forth between those times, and things have gone anywhere. One of the things he made up in his book was the biggest new growth industry in 2025 in the town or the state that he was in was one that builds roof tie downs to keep roofs from being blown off of houses in storms. It seemed like a joke back then. Some people went, yeah, right. And a joke. It's not
That's
a joke.
so interesting. Yeah.
So, people have, and he was not the first one to the party in terms of climate change. The predictions go back, at least to the 50s, and before that, even. You probably know more about that than I do, but it's
yeah, it's true. That's so interesting. Telling stories is still part of this. Kim Stanley Robinson, the novelist who wrote this book, Ministry for the Future. I had him on the show recently, and he's been writing these visions of climate futures.
Right, New York 2140.
Yeah, some of which are utopian. He said it's harder to be utopian these days. I had him on a show recently, and which is, I think that's true, but he's still at it. So maybe you have a song in mind. That'd be great.
I do have a song in mind. I think you've heard it before, but I'll do it again. And it's one that I wrote that on my most recent CD, Reclaiming My Time. Dar Williams sang a duet with me on this, and Dar's not here today, so I'll just sing the bridge by myself and her verse by myself also. I wrote this to sound like it initially, like it would be about royalty, human royalty, God Save the Queen, but it's not that. Save the monarch butterfly, save the king, King Condor, watch and rise, save the ancient wood before the fires arise. right. You in whom we trust. Save them from us. Save the emperor. Penguin from the zoo. Save December from the poachers on the loose and the wildfires from the poison that we use. You, eternal and just, save them, save them, save them from us. Now it has been written, He gave us dominion over things that call the earth, swim the sea or soar the sky. Forgive your people who know not what they do. Lift the veil from our eyes. Save the queen, queen of the honeybee. Those with scales or skin, feathers or fleece, and all the merry creatures living in the coral reef. You, in whom we trust, eternal and just, save them, save them, save them from us, save them, save them, save them. Save them, save them, save them from us.
Wow. Nice.
Thank you.
So this is on your. This is out now. Is this on your current album?
Yeah, this is on my record. Just came out May 28th. The album CD was released. It would be an album, but there's such a shortage of vinyl.
Oh,
Supply
right.
chain, you know. But
Wow.
but anyway, yeah, it's a prayer by my little brother was a priest, a Jesuit priest, and my mom had a master's in divinity. I was raised in this very Catholic family, but one of the things that we were taught was to be good stewards of the earth.
Right. Well, and I think, again, we were talking about this earlier with Jim Balog and others here. I don't know of anyone who wants to despoil the planet, actively despoil the planet. Maybe I know 2 or 3 people, but they are a rarity. Most conservatives who are hunters and fishermen, farmers, are all about tending landscapes. So there's ways to get common ground.
Yeah.
And I have to say,
even musicians.
Yeah. So Dean Friedman has shown up here from Peekskill, New York.
Excellent.
Has a great album out, American Lullaby. Which, Dean, you premiered a couple of songs on here last year during the COVID time. It's great to have you back. Can you hear us? Let's see. Dean, you might be muted. I can't hear you. Let's see. Oh, maybe did I mute? Maybe I muted you. Hold on, Dean. I think I muted you.
That's right.
Try again.
Is my camera working? My video working?
Yep. You're all good.
Okay.
Sorry. I think I had you muted.
No worries.
And how are you?
I'm hunky-dory, well, no one actually says that, but I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Good. So you had that wonderful song you wrote about getting back to a halfway normal world, which included baseball and and movies. Have you been to a movie since you wrote that now?
We did go to a small showing at the Jacob Burns Center, and it was a delight. Yeah, it was nice to get back into the world.
Great. Do you have a song in your head? And then Carter Brooks, I think you had something you wanted to sing before the end. And then we're going to circle back to Jim Balog one more time, talk about the book and the future.
Sure. And speaking of the future, this is a song off of the same album, American Lullaby, and it's by way of an apology to future generations for the mess we've left them. We were blessed with such bounty and plenty, miracles and wonders abound, but we took it for granted that one time too many. Now it's too late to turn it around. We went and despoiled a pristine habitat. Sorry about that, sorry about that. We meant to bequeath you a garden to nourish your body and soul. Instead, here we are begging your pardon. Willful neglect finally taking its toll. We did real damage to Earth's thermostat. Sorry about that, sorry about that. We didn't mean to be so mean. All we had to do is keep the forest green and the air and water clean, and use a little less polyethylene. Instead, we engaged in meaningless tit-for-tat. Sorry about that, sorry about that. Heirs to a world of infinite beauty, plenty to share, way more than enough. We fumbled our stewardship, failed in our duty, squandered your birthright for frivolous stuff. Now all your fine prospects will inevitably fall flat. Sorry about that, sorry about that. Feast your eyes on what we begat. Sorry about that, sorry about that. We poisoned the well, didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that.
Oh man, that's pretty wild. Yeah, sorry about that indeed. That's part of what we were talking about with Jim Balog about his book and about the role of art. At this time of pandemic and climate change, the book is essentially a documentation, a time capsule, literally a time capsule from the Anthropocene. My hope is that this is from the dawn of the Anthropocene, meaning the beginning, that we can get onto a better track going forward through this period and find a functional relationship with the planet and each other. And I hope that book and your continuing work, Jim, can do that. We're drawing toward the end of our session here. It's been great to get these up and rolling again. This is the second one I've done since resuming after a gap. I think it's good to kind of push these issues forward with a focus on the arts and hearts on Sunday mornings. Carter, I think you said you had a tune.
I do. I have a song that is relevant in a roundabout way.
And by the way, your ice has gotten much more transparent and melty.
Yes, I sped it along with a little water, but yeah, it's that's what happens. I always forget. It's early in the morning here, so I don't get up early enough to take it out of the freezer to let it frost. once you get out of the freezer, it's clear right away, but then it gets a bunch of frost on it, So, so this song was written by Peter Coyote for his in memory of his best friend, a guy named Ron Thalen, who was they knew each other from the Mime Troupe days, and they were diggers together and stuff. So I think this speaks a little bit to our bearing witness conversation, and I think also the we're part of nature conversation. So, As the Rain, it's called. My friend and companion, we went out to go walking. Didn't bring his shoes, didn't carry a cane. He passed through the gate on the day the plum blossomed, singing, "Don't you wait up, I'll be back." As the rain, the tobacco smoke's cleared, and the wine glass is broken. The ashes are cold where there once was a flame. Outside in the green hills, a wild bird is calling, singing, "Don't you wait up, he'll be back." As the rain, so dust off the keys of the upright piano, tap tambourines while the saxophone blows. Blossoms no more in the ices of winter. We don't mourn for a man who lived life as he chose. Now there's new glass in the roof, and the lights comes in streaming. You can lie in the bed and see starshot domains. In the dreams of his wife, well, he's there fair and handsome, and his children are singing, "He'll be back." As the rain, now fog is the breath of the mountains at morning. We're passengers all on runaway train. Old Buck in New Velvet and the baby a bornin'. We're all standing in line. Come back as the rain. So dust off the keys of the upright piano, tap tambourine while that saxophone blows. No blossoms no more in the ices of winter. We don't mourn for a man who lived life as he chose. My friend and companion, he went out to go walking. Didn't bring his shoes, didn't carry a cane. He passed through the gate on day the plum blossomed, singing, "Don't you wait up, I'll be back as the rain."
Wow. That's really cool.
I can't stop playing the song. It's every night.
Wow. That's pretty powerful tunes, and I like that the ending as well. So this has been a great in what the Sunday Sanity show. Just a couple more. Whoops, darn it, having the usual technical difficulties here. My life wouldn't be complete without technical difficulties. And again, just here's some of Jim Balog's photographs from his extraordinary book, The Human Element, a time capsule from the Anthropocene to the Anthropocene. Thank you for all for being here this morning, especially Dean Friedman. Great to have you back, popping in, and John Hall down from Nashville. A beautiful song. Enjoy your time back on the road with Orleans. And Jim Balog, let's come back sometime. You know, we had some technical issues this morning, but I'd like to keep in touch with you and help convey what you're up to. Thank you for being here again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks to all of you. It's been great fun.
A pleasure.
Really interesting.
A lot of fun.
All right. Stay well. Have a good rest of the day. Good luck to those at COP26. I'll be doing a couple of live shows with people from there in the this final stretch. Although to me, you know, the big show is already done. These conferences of the parties, essentially, you'll hear lots of drama. People are waiting urgently for some outcome, but it's actually the good part has already happened. Countries have put their commitments forward. Now we have to turn them into actions by being on the case, always on the ground, and testing and probing people's assertions to make sure they turn into action. So thanks again, everybody. This is Sustain What? It's a Columbia University Climate School presentation. I'm Andy Revkin. There'll be more. So share this as soon as we're done. The videos you're watching on are available to share on all these different platforms.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thanks, Andy.
Be well. And we are